The Magdalene laundries, also known as asylums, were institutions usually run by Catholic religious orders, which operated from the 18th to the late 20th centuries here in Ireland. The Dublin Laundry, on Lower Leeson Street, was the first such institution in Ireland. It was a Church of Ireland-run institution and accepted only Protestant women. It was founded in 1765 by Lady Arabella Denny. Similar institutions were run by Presbyterians. Several religious institutes established laundries, reformatories and industrial schools, sometimes all together on the same plot of land, with the aim to save the souls primarily of women and children. Examples were Sisters of Our Lady of Charity of Refuge, and the Congregation of the Sisters of Mercy, who ran the largest laundries in Dublin. These large complexes became a massive interlocking system, painstakingly built up over a number of decades, and consequently, laundries became part of Ireland's larger system for the control of children and women. They were run ostensibly to house fallen women, and an estimated 30,000 were incarcerated in these institutions. These figures are only an estimation, however, and the number is possibly higher. In the late 18th century, the term fallen women primarily referred to prostitutes, but by the end of the 19th century, the laundries were filled with many different kinds of women. Girls who were not prostitutes at all, but either seduced women, women who had yet to engage in sexual activity, or children born out of wedlock, were incarcerated for transgressing the narrow moral code of the time. These same religious congregations managed the orphanages and reformatory schools. Thus, these facilities all helped sustain each other. Girls from the reformatory and industrial schools often ended up working their entire lives in the Magdalene laundries. Almost all the institutions were run by female religious congregations, that is, nuns, and were scattered throughout the country in prominent locations in towns and cities. In this way, they were powerful and pervasive, able to effectively control the lives of women and children from all classes. These particular institutions intentionally shared overriding characteristics, including a regime of prayer, silence, work in a laundry, and a preference for permanent inmates, which contradicts the religious congregation's stated mission to protect, reform, and rehabilitate. As the expansion of the laundries was taking place, they were becoming a part of a large network of institutions. The treatment of the girls was becoming increasingly violent and abusive. The asylums became particularly cruel, more secretive and, emphatically more punitive. Though these women had committed no crime and had never been put on trial, their indefinite incarceration was enforced by locked doors, iron gates and prison guards in the form of apathetic sisters. By 1920, the laundries had almost entirely abandoned claims of rehabilitation, and instead were seamlessly incorporated into the state's architecture of containment. To enforce order and maintain a monastic atmosphere, the inmates were required to observe strict silence for much of the day. The institutions were failing to achieve their supposed objective. They had little impact on prostitution over the period, and yet they were continuing to multiply and expand due to their self-supporting free labor. As the laundries became more widespread, it extended beyond prostitution to petty criminals, orphans, mentally disabled women and abused girls. Even young girls who were considered too promiscuous, too flirtatious, or too beautiful, were sent to an asylum by their families. This paralleled the practice in state-run lunatic asylums in Britain and Ireland in the same period, where many people with alleged social dysfunction were committed to asylums. Without a family member on the outside who could vouch for them, many incarcerated individuals stayed in the asylums for the rest of their lives, many taking religious vows. Given Ireland's historically conservative sexual values, the laundries were a generally accepted social institution until the end of the 20th century. They disappeared with changes in sexual morals, or, as they ceased to be profitable, possibly the advent of the washing machine, has been as instrumental in closing these laundries, as of changing attitudes. Based on historical records, the religious institutes had motivations other than simply wanting to curtail prostitution. These multiple motivations led to the multiplication of these facilities. Additionally, the state of Ireland and its government were heavily intertwined with religion. As the motivations started to shift from a need to maintain social and moral order within the bounds of a patriarchal structure, to a desire to continue profiting from a free workforce, the laundries became a part of a large structure of suppression. With the multiplication of these institutions and the subsequent and dramatic rise in the number of beds available within them, the need to staff the laundries became increasingly urgent. This urgency resulted in a new definition of fallen women. One that was much less precise and was expanding to include any women who appeared to challenge traditional notions of Irish morality. This new definition resulted in even more suffering, especially among those increasing numbers who were not prostitutes but unmarried mothers, forced to give up their babies as well as their lives. And as this concept of fallen expanded, so did the facilities, in both physical size and role, in society. Women were branded as both a mother and a criminal if they happened to have a child out of wedlock. The choices the women at the time had were very limited. They had no social welfare system. Therefore, many resorted to prostitution or entered these mother and child homes. In 1993, a mass grave containing 700 corpses was uncovered in the convent grounds of the Tomb Laundry, County Galway. This led to media revelations about the operations of the secretive institutions. Since 2001, the Irish government had acknowledged that women in the Magdalene laundries were victims of abuse. However, the Irish government had resisted calls for investigation and proposals for compensation. It maintained the laundries were privately run and abuses at the laundries were outside the government's remit. In contrast to these claims, evidence exists that Irish courts routinely sent women convicted of petty crimes to the laundries. Ireland's Catholic-run laundries survived for more than 200 years, and were quietly supported by the state, and operated by these religious communities. The government awarded lucrative contracts to the laundries without any insistence on protection or fair treatment of their workers, and Irish state employees helped keep laundry facilities stocked with workers by bringing women to work there and returning escaped workers. In February 2013, a few days after the publication of the McAleese report, two religious sisters gave an interview on Irish national radio, under conditions of anonymity for themselves and their institute. They described the Irish media coverage of the abuse at the laundries, which they claimed not to have participated in, as a one-sided anti-Catholic forum. They displayed no remorse for the institute's past. Apologize for what? Apologize for providing a service. We provided a free service for the country, they claimed. They complained that all the shame of the era is being dumped on the religious orders. The sins of society are being placed on us. On hearing the interview, a survivors group announced to the press that they were shocked, horrified and enormously upset by the sisters' portrayal of events. In a detailed commentary by the president of the Catholic League, a U.S. advocacy group, published in July 2013, claimed that no one was imprisoned, nor forced against her will to stay. There was no slave labor. It's all a lie. The Sisters of Mercy, Sisters of Our Lady of Charity of the Good Shepherd, and Sisters of Charity, have refused demands from the Irish government, the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child and the UN Committee Against Torture, to contribute to the compensation fund for surviving victims, an estimated 600 of whom were still alive in March 2014. In 2011, a monument was erected in Ennis at the site of the former industrial school and laundry in appreciation of the Sisters of Mercy. As recently as 2015, Ennis Municipal Local Council felt confident enough, despite the findings of the McAleese and Ryan reports, to rename a road, which ran through the site of the former industrial school and laundry, in honor of the Sisters of Mercy. There are conflicting views to the appropriateness of these gestures in this County Clare town. Having lobbied the government of Ireland for 2 years for an investigation of the history of the laundries, advocacy group Justice for Magdalenes presented its case to the United Nations Committee Against Torture, alleging that the conditions within the laundries and the exploitation of their laborers amounted to human rights violations. On the 6th of June 2011, the panel urged Ireland to investigate allegations that for decades women and girls sent to work in Catholic laundries were tortured. In response, the Irish government set up a committee chaired by Senator Martin McAleese to establish the facts of the Irish state's involvement with the Magdalene laundries. Following the 18-month inquiry, the committee published its report on the 5th of February 2013, finding significant state collusion in the admission of thousands of women into the institutions. The report found over 11,000 women had entered the laundries since 1922. Significant levels of verbal and mental abuse to women inside was reported, but there were no suggestions of regular physical or sexual abuse. The report also noted that, according to its analysis, the laundries were not generally highly profitable. Elderly survivors said they would go on hunger strike over the failure of successive Irish governments to set up a financial redress scheme for the thousands of women enslaved there. Irish Prime Minister, Enda Kenny, while professing sorrow at the abuses revealed, did not issue an immediate apology, prompting criticism from other members of the Irish Parliament. Kenny promised there would be a full parliamentary debate on the report when people had an opportunity to read it. Survivors were critical that an apology had not been immediately forthcoming. On the 19th of February 2013, Enda Kenny issued a formal state apology. He described the laundries as the nation's shame and said, "Therefore, I, as Prime Minister, on behalf of the state, the government, and our citizens deeply regret and apologize unreservedly to all those women for the hurt that was done to them, and for any stigma they suffered, as a result of the time they spent in a Magdalene laundry." The Prime Minister also outlined part of the compensation package to be offered to victims of the laundries. He stated, "That's why the government has today asked the President of the Law Reform Commission, Judge John Quirk, to undertake a 3-month review and to make recommendations as to the criteria that should be applied in assessing the help that the government can provide in the areas of payments and other supports, including medical card, psychological and counseling services and other welfare needs. Since they were not paid, it seems clear that these girls were used as a ready source of free labor for these laundry businesses." Today, however, in 2020, there are still many women out there being denied, or their claims of indemnification delayed, in the hope that these women, many in their 70s, will have died before compensation is paid. They have even gone as far as to deny that certain women were even in the laundries. These religious orders, sadly, but not surprisingly, are still fighting these poor innocent women. Ireland has moved on very little from its 19th century attitude and the morals towards us women.